And I do believe we're live.
Who are you?
I don't know. I get up in the morning and look in the mirror, and I just don't see the face I was expecting to see. This guy shows up and he's got white stuff all over his face, and I don't quite understand it. But... Hello, Allison.
Hello.
How is life with you today?
It's going okay. It's sunny outside. That's all I can ask for.
Okay. All right. You're doing star charts at the magazine, right?
Yes. Yes. So I finished August's and am fixing July's, and we'll start on September's very shortly.
So what is up for July?
I've already forgotten. I think all of the planets, actually. That's why there were a lot of charts.
Oh, okay. All right.
Almost all of the planets are visible in July, at a given time. So
yeah, you know Jupiter and Saturn are going to be coming into very, very good visibility late this summer, and then later on there will be an opposition of Mars later in the year as well. So it's going to be a damn good time coming up this year for planetary oppositions of the big three.
Okay, all right.
And there's a meteor shower.
I'm not Allison, by the way. I'm Dave, just incidentally.
I'll believe you.
But it's good to see you both.
Yes, although I am gonna take my glasses off. We have gotten comments. We're starting to get comments from people.
Well, that's good.
Who watch this, which is fun. We're actually getting
is minimized among them.
Yeah,
Jeff, you're going to tell us about a famous historical situation that you were involved with regarding the Hubble Space Telescope and a star-forming region, the Eagle Nebula. Are you not going to start about that? I think
I was. We're coming up on what? Oh yeah, I was, wasn't I? Yeah.
Because
to do this, I have to do this properly here. Here we go. There we go. Aha! See, you have to have the effects right. We're coming up on the. How can it be that it has been 30 years or almost? What is it on the 24th? 30 years since the launch of Hubble. How can that be?
That's a long time.
That's a long time. Is that when you and I met?
I think it was. I think we met 30 years ago now, and I'm just incredibly impressed with you as a scientist, but even more so because you're still speaking to me.
Well, I was going to turn it around and say I'm incredibly impressed going from the beat reporter to the. Are you just God at Astronomy Magazine? Is that who you are, or are you merely a demigod?
No, I started as a young man at 21 years old, and I just never have found the exit. Really, if you find your way out, you can leave. But they never get out of the building. So if you stay around long enough, I discovered they put you in charge of everything.
Okay. Sounds like I got out of academia at just the right time then. That would not have been a good thing. Anyway, okay, so Eagle Nebula, back in the day, a long, long time ago. I was actually originally on the, and I'm getting the funky echo. Oh, well. If at some point I stop and go, it's the funky echo in my ear again. Anyway, I was on the team that built the camera that first flew on Hubble, the Wide Field Planetary Camera with Pick, and with Jim Westfall as the principal investigator. And sometime we should do a show just talking about Jim Westfall. Did you know Jim well at all?
Not well, only as an acquaintance, but I heard stories as well, some from you.
Oh,
that would be a very interesting topic.
A fair number of those stories we couldn't actually tell in the current venue. Jim, people who don't know, Jim Westfall principal investigator on the Wide Field Planetary Camera and Space Telescope, winner of a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. Brilliant. Full professor at Caltech. Played a huge role in the birth of infrared astronomy, so on and so forth. His only college degree was a bachelor's in physics from the University of Tulsa. And he was just that good. He went from there, well, it was geophysics, I think. He went from there and he went to work for Kerr-McGee, as I think he just kind of started literally working out in the oil fields and eventually wound up running their research facility in Tulsa, I think it was. And then there was some project that there was somebody at Caltech doing, and he went out there to spend a few weeks to work on it. And while he was out there, he got involved in some other things and then got involved in some other things and so on and so forth. And eventually got to the point that the place wouldn't run without him and they had to keep him around. So they made him a professor. I don't think that happens anymore. But he always looked like he probably belonged not in a professor's office at Caltech. He kind of looked like he belonged off on a oil well somewhere. And he talked like it too. The man could turn a room blue like no one I have ever heard. Absolutely, and in creative ways with bad Oklahoma pronunciation thrown in. And at this point, I really do have to stop, because if I started giving you some of the examples of the sorts of phrases he would turn, we couldn't, they would run us off the air immediately. Anyway, so he was the PI on the WFPIC. And I had the dubious good fortune, bad fortune, I don't know, of being the guy who was sitting in front of the computer screen on live NASA Select TV when the very first image from Hubble came in, and we kind of stared at it and said, this is not exactly what it is that we were expecting.
That was not your favorite moment in was it?
That was not my favorite moment. In fact, Allison, if I say the first light picture from Hubble, do you know the picture that I'm talking about?
I know the one that at least has been publicized, so I assume yes.
Okay, the one where you see the Hubble and the ground base side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And you're like, that's not what we were expecting.
That's my work. I made that. I made that while sitting literally on live national television. I put that together. And I
was that the nucleus of M100?
No.
Like,
no.
It was staring into the eyepiece of a 20-inch reflector after 6 to 8 bottles of Jack Daniels. That came later, that image?
That one came later. This was just the one that had a few stars in the field.
Okay.
And there's a fun story that goes with that as well. But anyway, after that, I was asked to join the team that was now building the WFPIC 2, which, as an aside, that for those of us on the WFPIC 2 team is not an aside at all. You will hear people talk about the post-COSTAR Space Telescope as if COSTAR fixed it. In fact, Allison, I'm going to ask you, if we talk about fixing Space Telescope, what jumps to mind for you?
Giving it the optics to give it clear vision, yeah.
Yeah, but is it what's the term? What's the instrument that jumps to your mind?
In terms of fixing it?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you, actually. I mean, I know what COSTAR is, but I don't have but I guess at least at the time, it was never, this instrument is fixing it. It's just, they went up and, gave it glasses or whatever. No one actually publicized the name.
Yeah, it's the COSTAR, the Corrective Optic Space Telescope axial replace, gets credit for it. And the reason it gets credit for it was that it was built on, or it was Goddard Space Flight Center that built it. And at the time, oh God, how could I forget her name? Dave, the senator from Maryland, who
Oh,
was head
Barbara
of
Barbara Mikulski.
Barbara Mikulski.
Yeah.
Barbara Mikulski
Okay.
was a real power in Washington.
Yep.
And Barbara Mikulski really wanted it to be her folk in Maryland who fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the political reality had to be that the Maryland folk fixed it. And so, you know, it was on CoStar and you know, Goddard and Space Telescope Science Institute and such as that. The reality is that the instrument that fixed it was built at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, and it was the Wide Field Planetary Camera 2. And as recently as the 25th anniversary, they were still putting out press showing WIFPIC 2 pictures and saying, this is the post CoStar WIFPIC 2 image. Okay, I'll set that aside. Anyway, so this image
I have a
behind
fond
me.
space in my heart for WIFPIC 2, though. So. Makes me feel better.
I have a very fond place in my heart. Well, anyway, so the image behind me, I'll move through this right quick, is the Eagle Nebula, M16, Messier 16. Number 16 on Messier's list of objects that were not comets. And so no one needed to look at them because they weren't comets. And it's showing a region of star formation. It's like 7,000 light years away. To give you a sense of scale, the little nodules that you see sitting on the top of that are large enough to contain our solar system, maybe 50 times over or something like that. And this is one of 3 pillars that, if you've seen it, these are the things called the pillars of creation. And we took this thing, it was about a year after the repair mission, and people were just started getting around to realizing that that maybe it was really honest to goodness fixed. And so we did the press conference on this thing, and it just took off. This thing has shown up now on a postage stamp. It's shown up everywhere. Every time my wife sees it to this day, she says, tell me again why we're not getting royalties on that image. But that's not the way that works. But the press coverage on this was a lot of fun. Dave, what did you guys do with this? Do you remember?
We did a huge amount. It was a big, big deal because at the time we were really, really looking for impressive, successful images, and there were an array of great Hubble images. But this thing, there's something that a magical picture of a nebula does. It's very ethereal. I mean, this is a star-forming region. This gas is collapsing down into newborn suns. The Bach globules, named after our old pal Bart Bach, these dusty pillars are collapsing down, and they're forming new stars. And so you can sort of see, you know, this great recycling program of the universe, of this junk left over from old stars coming down and giving birth now to new suns, new solar systems. And it just really captured the imagination, this picture, of the public like no other astronomical picture did. This, I think it's fair to say, and I'm not saying this because you're here, Jeff, it's probably the most famous astronomical image, certainly in modern history. And that's saying an awful lot. You said it's on a US postage stamp and all over the place. So we went nuts, and there was really a public great relief of rediscovering Hubble, and also sort of a joy of seeing the universe in a new way at this time. And this was 1995, I think it was, this image, and the flood of images that were coming out at that time were sort of rewriting our picture of visually of how we saw the whole universe. And so this was sort of the centerpiece of that realization. So it was a big, big deal for us, the magazine. Had a couple of bright comets at the time going on as well. Hale-Bopp and Yakutaki. So it was a golden age of really sort of rediscovering the universe and the sky above us.
Yeah, it the story there. I mean, I first John Morse and I and God, was Chris Burrows involved in that? He may have been. We're doing a press thing at Goddard about, well, some months before this. We were doing a thing on Herbig Haro objects and star formation and all of that kind of stuff. And Ed Weiler was there, who was the head of the Space Telescope. I forget exactly what his job title was there, but basically he was the guy at headquarters that all of this stuff was under. And he was there. And after this, I kind of took him aside, and this was a few months before. And I said, Ed, come here. He said, yeah. I said, I'm going to show you your next press conference. And I opened this folder and kind of let him get a peek at the image. And I pretty well had to snap it shut and take it away from him so that he didn't grab it.
But Ed's a pretty intense guy too.
Oh yeah, Ed is an intense guy. Ed is a very intense guy. But so that's. And he said, okay, you've got to get that written up. You've got to get it published, all of that kind of stuff. And that picture actually made it onto the cover of the international edition of Time magazine. And the reason it didn't make it onto the cover of the US edition of Time magazine, well, I have to back up. There was this deal. Okay, if you get really neat stuff out of Hubble, Time was going to do a big thing with Hubble. And we'd have the cover and so on and so forth. And Ed and I actually were joking kind of the day before this thing was supposed to come out, that as long as no major world leader is assassinated in the next 24 hours, we will get the cover of Time magazine. And it was later that day that Rabin was shot.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So yeah, sorry for the downer for that. But anyway, I have copies of the international version, so I can show people, here's Time magazine with my image on the cover, or at least an image that I took on the cover. And as long as they don't look too closely and realize that it's the international issue that had already been mailed out at that time. But anyway, so it went far and wide. Got lots of fun stories to think about. Again, it's fun because it's a cool picture. It looks like it's, some kind of worm on the bottom of the ocean or something. It looks very organic. And so people look at it and think that's really, that's neat in that respect. And it's also a science story that Aunt Martha can understand, that you're talking about a place where new stars are forming. And if you could go back 4.5 billion years and look at the formation of our own sun and solar system, there's a very good chance that this is the kind of environment that you would see. And I won't go into detail, but we actually have data from meteorites of all things that tell you about the presence of some very, very short-lived radioactive species that had to be around when the sun and the solar system formed. And by short-lived, I mean 100,000 years type numbers. And that means that somewhere there had to be a source for that kind of stuff very close to the solar system. And the reasonable thing is to say, gee, we must have been close to a massive star that exploded. And what you're looking at here, the reason all of this stuff is glowing is because there are some very massive, very luminous stars nearby that are hitting this with ultraviolet light and causing it to glow. And that's why it sort of looks like it's evaporating away or something like that. So anyway, it's story that Aunt Martha can understand. And so after we did the whole press event, Don Savage, who was doing PR for this at the time, got a call from CNN and said, grab Hester and get him over here and we want to interview him. And I'm a kid at the time, and that was back when I would get my hair cut to about the length that it currently is. So so we go over to the CNN studios and they talk, and it's intelligent conversation, and we're talking about all of this neat science and so on and so forth. And then they sit me down in this room. I'm really the only one there, and I've got this big funky screen sitting in front of me where I can't see anything. All that I can hear what's being said, but I'm just kind of staring into this blank wall with a camera in it. And okay, we're live. The very first question out of the gate was, so I understand that you've taken a picture of Jesus. And I guess somewhere,
You didn't immediately reply in the affirmative, Jeff, to that?
I did not immediately apply in the affirmative.
Okay.
After the fact, I would have liked to have gone and choked him, but no, they've been getting calls where there was some little spot in there that people were doing the, face of Jesus on the tortilla kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I have a $7,000 piece of toast here you can have, by the way, if you're interested.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey, I will see your $7,000 piece of toast, and I'll raise you a $3 billion picture of Jesus. Let's
Deal.
Yeah. But this thing kind of grew legs. I don't know. I think one of my favorite experiences, or maybe favorite's the wrong word, maybe the strangest experience out of this is I got a call from who was I don't remember who gave me the call, but anyway, there was an Irish cider company called Bulmers that makes hard cider, and they were looking for people to do a commercial. And I think what they were looking for was an American astronomer that had done something that people would recognize and that looked like he probably drank a lot of hard cider.
Well, why on earth would they have chosen you then?
I just cannot imagine. I was so clean cut. I was so, I was never one to crack a joke. Of course, suit and tie, the whole, I cannot imagine how they could have come to that kind of conclusion. But it was great fun because they put me upstairs on the British Airways 747 to fly from LA to Heathrow, and then the next day from Heathrow on to Spain, south of Spain, Costa del Sol. And there is, there's an observatory. Do you remember the name of it? I'm sitting here and realize I don't, which is embarrassing.
In did you say southern Spain?
Southern Spain.
It's not Calar Alto, perhaps.
I think it was.
Maybe it was. I don't know.
Anyway, yeah. I should know. Anyway, so the idea was that we were gonna film there, and what this thing really was a junket, because they flew me out several days before, because after all, you had to get there in time to not be jet lagged anymore, and of course, you had to leave a couple of days to do things like find the jacket that you were going to wear for the shoot, and then there was the day to do the rehearsal. And then there was the day to do the actual shoot. And so it wound up kind of being a week in southern Spain. And everybody from the company was there and so on and so forth. This whole thing was just a big junket. But it was great fun. And other people on this commercial were people like the composer who did Tubular Bells. And there was a famous architect, and there was a famous Cuban boxer, and all of this. And my line was the line from Newton: "If I have seen farther than you, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants."
Nice.
So that was kind of an interesting. So anyway, it is a fun piece of science that has opened all sorts of kind of fascinating doors to experiences that you don't always get to have if you're an astronomer. So we've had fun with it.
Can I ask a question of Allison and of Jeff? 30 years ago, we learned so much, the public learned so much from Hubble, from images like this, about the large parts of the universe, things that are really big. I think the public really started to understand star formation and what was going on out in the galaxy and so on. Why is it that 30 years later, we seem to have such terrible, terrible trouble with the public learning about and understanding things that are really small. That's a transition.
I'm leaving this one for Allison.
It depends on what you mean by what the trouble is. Is it getting them to actually understand that it's a threat?
People who are going now and saying, we've got to open things up again here. And
I think the problem is they're thinking too small, not big enough.
Well, that's what
they're thinking.
They don't seem to be understanding what's going on here with this pandemic. Many of the people in this country, it appears, or at least in certain places in the country.
Well, now I'm going to ask you, Dave. Does it come as a surprise to you?
No.
That yeah, well, okay, yeah. So I'm going to turn it right back around on you. Why does it not come as a surprise to you that people find it impossible to understand even basic science, or at least to imagine that they should care about basic science?
What we have here is troubling, because I mean, it used to be many years ago that people put their trust and they put their belief, even if they didn't want to take the time to learn about things themselves, which takes time and effort to be educated. Let's face it. And it's not always fun either. You could be off playing games or driving around, having a good time. It takes work to understand things and to learn about them. However, many years ago, a lot of people who were casually around doing things did have a lot of faith in people who are educated, highly educated. Now there seems to be this sort of postmodern skepticism that, I don't believe in the expert because I have an impulse that I know the way things are. Why is that? That I don't think is a situation that has always existed.
It hasn't always existed. I mean, I'm gonna look back at Allison. It's a if you go back, and the reason I keep throwing this back is because if you really get me going on this, there are things that will light my hair on fire. And the turf that we are on right now is turf that will imagine. I can't. Person like me having something that'll light his hair on fire. I know that it's
I don't believe that for a second.
Completely unbelievable. But it
well, let me ask you this. I saw a thing from our pal Neil Tyson yesterday on social media. This business about how, the curve is starting to flatten. Yeah, a lot of people have died and stuff, but it's getting better. So why can't we open things up? And the economy is in a terrible, horrific state. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt about the fact that we all want the economy to rebound and recover swiftly. Everyone wants that. I want to retire someday and go to somewhere where I can see the sky again. Everyone wants that. But let me ask you this. Why is it that there's this sort of feeling that we can do what we want to do regardless of the facts? Neil yesterday posted a thing and he said, imagine that if we had been using a dandruff shampoo and the dandruff seems to be going away, therefore I can stop using the dandruff shampoo, is the conclusion you draw. You get a series of antibiotics from your doctor and you have an infection after 3 days of a 10-day course of pills. The infection seems to be going away. I can stop taking the pills. Do you see my point here? The logic is not quite in place for the people because things are starting to improve, at least in many places, to therefore abandon the treatment.
Okay. The heck with it. Back it up. Once upon a time, when you and I were kids, people said, oh, gee, science is cool, and we were sending people to the moon, and they still remembered physicists as the people who won World War II, and all of that kind of stuff. And it was a time when, the United States was going gangbusters and so on and so forth. And then, ironically, I think an awful lot of the bizarre stuff that today is going on the right started off on the left. It started with the postmodernists. It started with people, a great deal is made about Thomas Kuhn. I think there are aspects of what he did. He was the guy that wrote Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And there was a lot that was of value in what he did, but he sort of talked about, well, gee, scientific knowledge is just what scientists say it is, as if there was nothing beyond that. People like Feyerabend and people like that, and I probably just butchered his name, came along and, oh, it's, scientists are just priests and so on and so forth. And the right kind of took this and ran with it. That, we don't need this science stuff because scientists are telling us stuff that we don't want to hear. And that turned out to be a pretty good ride for him. And you look at where we have reached now. There's a reason why there was a March for Science shortly after Trump was inaugurated. And it's because people understood that what was going on there. And so when you look at what's going on with COVID, the administration 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, whenever it was, fired all the people who were the people talking about things like pandemics, because we don't need those people. They're just scientists. What do they know? They fired all the people or tried to fire all the people, as many as they could, who were talking about anything from pollution to climate change to you name it. Scientists became these people that, they're just a bunch of naysayers who get in our way of doing the things that we want to do. And somehow they convinced a lot of people to fall lockstep with that notion. And so the science denial has become a real thing. And it's, you go back, there's a book called Merchants of Doubt that talks about the people that went back and sold or did the disinformation campaign to try to convince people that cigarette smoking wasn't bad for you after all, and managed to draw that out for decades by playing this game of obfuscating the issue. Climate change comes along. Those very same people, the same individuals using the same tactics, come along and spread this notion that, well, climate change is all just a big hoax and so on and so forth. And it becomes a political litmus test where to say that, yeah, I accept climate change is to distance yourself from your people, and people don't do that. And so all of that was in place for COVID. And so COVID came along and there was nothing new. People just reacted to it the way that they had been taught to react to these kinds of things. And yeah, and the thing is, though, is that physical reality just doesn't give two shakes. Okay. Does not give two I think a rodent's hindquarters is the phrase that I used in an article that I recently wrote for somebody or other. Anyway, yeah, and physical reality just doesn't care. And so if somebody's saying, oh, I don't believe in COVID, I don't, well, I'm sorry, you may not believe in COVID, but trust me, COVID believes in you.
Very well said, Jeff. Let me ask a question of Allison here, and I'll try to make this not so drawn out, the question here, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, Allison. My father used to teach, among other things, organic chemistry and other things, but also taught some philosophy of science. And to make it very, very quick, I mean, the sort of separation of the way people believe what is true is across a spectrum. And of course, it goes from, intuition in the old day, I believe what I dreamed and it's going to, or just have a gut instinct. Some politicians actually say I have a gut instinct. And so I know that's true, now even, intuition is on one end and authoritarianism, who I believe what people tell me, because I believe in them. Then something that's a little bit better than that is the sort of rational methods, mathematics and so on. But better yet, in the views of scientists, of course, is empiricism, of observation, of experiments, of testing, of repeatedly testing that anybody can do, or observing, so that you know what reality is. Now, how did we come to, as time goes on, a spot in your mind, Allison, where to most people, or many people, probably most or nearly all, statistically maybe, what they feel, the intuition, the gut feeling, those other methods of what I believe to be the truth are just as good as the empirical science? Well, you just have to have faith in the scientists anyway. It's just another kind of faith. Is that the world that we live in permanently here? You just choose your faith and the evidence really doesn't matter.
Well, a little bit. I think it kind of comes down to, and I am not speaking with any authority here, but at least in my opinion, it's kind of human nature. You don't like to be told things you don't want to hear. And you are not inclined to believe them because you just don't want to hear them. And I think, it kind of goes back to what the issues that scientists have been communicating on recently are things like climate change, which are not good. It's not something you want to hear about, or it's, antibiotic resistant strains of disease. And it's been a lot of, and I mean, this is nobody's fault. It's just, there have been a lot of large discussion topics recently that are things that people don't want to hear. And I think that kind of is what makes them tend toward disbelieving, because it's so much easier, especially because these are topics that, again, they may not touch you personally. Climate change is slow and you don't notice it, or, I've never gotten anything that was antibiotic resistant, so it's not a problem. And I think COVID is a little bit the same way, even, with what Jeff says, where after this wave is done, such a tiny percentage of the population will have had it that most people actually will not have been directly touched by COVID-19. And so it still seems very far away, despite the fact that it's very widespread. And so I think it's the same problem in that when issues seem far away and they don't really directly affect you, other than it's uncomfortable because I can't go to work, or I can't go outside, or I can't go to Starbucks, still not directly affecting you enough, I think, for it to really be a concern.
Let me ask this. If you'll permit me, I'll go on a rant for just 1 second here and join you, Jeff, because one thing that I find fascinating is people's wheels are spinning. We can't go to Starbucks. We need to resume our normal life. We're going to go and protest. We can't go to Starbucks and hang out with our friends. The sacrifice that we're being asked to make. Well, a couple of generations ago, our ancestors, close ancestors, fought a world war to preserve democracy and to eliminate criminal gangs who killed off 1% of Earth's population.
I think the problem is they were so successful that this generation hasn't had to deal with a problem like that.
We're complaining. We have to stay home and work home and then watch movies from home. And that's too hard. Is that what we're saying is too hard? How about going and fighting World War II for 6 years, coming out of the Great Depression too? These people who can't do this, it's too hard to stay home and behave ourselves now.
Well, and
Holy
there's such a
crap.
pile of issues. I mean, first of all, just the inconsistency of it. Um, okay, you guys need to go and you need to protest to liberate those states that actually believe in science. And this a call from the Rose Garden. Go out there and liberate those. I thought it was funny beyond words. I don't know if you saw the news this morning when Kellyanne Conway comes out and says President Trump wants everyone to know that he thinks they should be practicing proper social distancing during their protests. And I brought along, no, okay, I have to get rid of my background here.
Yeah, it's not working with
I brought along, here we go. I brought a prop today to talk about this. And so here it goes. Protesters protesting that they have to be careful about getting COVID, being told by the guy who told them to protest to be sure and practice proper social distancing. Okay. There. That's what that. And it's kind of my take on that, frankly. I don't know. We may have talked about this last time. I don't remember. I really kind of think that people who do this should have to, have a little card that says, I am choosing to defend what I consider to be my constitutional rights or whatever. And therefore I decline health care for anything COVID related. It's for people to go out and behave like that, and then they're going to go out and infect other people, and they're going to go into hospitals and infect people, and they're going to go home and they're going to infect their families, and people are going to die. And then you say, what are they going to die for? Well, they don't know what they're going to die for. Trump in his, when he was telling people to go out and do this thing, said that they need to do it to protect their Second Amendment rights. What in the world does doing the appropriate thing in the face of COVID have to do with carrying guns? I mean, what do they think? They're going to go out there with a shotgun? I see a virus. Wham! I don't get it. I truly don't. But it's just this hot button that they can, the Second Amendment. And if a Republican punches the Second Amendment button, then everybody goes, ah! And their hair catches on fire. The thing is, as you say, in any other context, if you talk to people and said, well, what's going on here is that as the reason why people are not dying right now by the hundreds of thousands daily, the reason why we aren't on our way to seeing 2.5 million deaths by the end of the summer is because we're doing the social distancing thing, because we're staying home from work, and so on and so forth, and that we're starting to get a handle on it. We've been using the dandruff shampoo for a while now, and the dandruff is getting better, and we know that, okay, if we just keep using the dandruff shampoo for a while longer, it's going to get to the point that now we don't have to use the dandruff shampoo every day. We can kind of keep it under control. But instead it's, oh no, we have to open up, and we're going to protest, we have to open up, and so on and so forth. There's still enough out there. There's still enough community contagion transmission going on out there that if we were to do the kinds of stuff that they're talking about doing, we'd be right back on the same roller coaster ride again. You're starting to see that in China. You're starting to see that in Singapore, where, man, Singapore was all over this. They did a spectacular job of shutting this down, did everything right. And then they kind of looked at it and said, oh, we can start backing off again. And they're seeing, here it comes. There's a second wave. And people are saying, oh, but the economy. If we just let this thing run through the population, we're talking about something probably on the high side of 2 million people. We're talking about something like 4 or 5 times the number of Americans that died in World War II. Okay. Now, as you say, we fought a major world war over saving people. But we have to do it. Why do we have to do it? We have to do it for the economy. Well, hang on there for a second. If you actually look at our economy, workers right now are about twice as productive as they were in 1980, except they're only being paid roughly the same real wage. And if you think about that for a second, you say, oh, so if we just went back to distributing the money in the way that we did in 1980, that means that I could work half time and still have the same quality of life that I do now. So yeah, that's what that means. And so if we had to have, say, 25% unemployment for a year and a half while we get this thing under control, there's really no need for anybody to go hungry or find themselves on the street or anything like that. The answer is no, there's not. So why is it that we need to go out there and save the economy? It's not the economy that we need to save. It's the folk that are sitting on huge accumulations of wealth that are worried about having their power and their wealth saved. We have plenty of wealth in this nation that if we wanted to get through COVID without having to sacrifice more hundreds of thousands or millions of people, then we could do that. And it's these people going and protesting. It is my God-given right to be cannon fodder for the wealthy. I just don't get it. Well, no, I do get it. They don't understand what they're being asked to do because they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They're not thinking about these in terms that you and I would recognize as rational thought. Here is my group, and being a good human, I believe what my group tells me to believe, and my group tells me to believe that we need to go and haul our guns out to the Michigan State House and protest being asked to not kill ourselves. I don't know.
Okay, we've talked about irrationality. Let's talk about rationality. Now, what we're going to have to do at some point here eventually is to test people very, very widely and to develop a vaccine, we hope, which will contain proteins called antigens. This may be a word that not everyone who's in Michigan is various places has heard of, but that's what we need actually. Now, the problem is that's going to take some time, and there will be people who will be tested who will test positive for antibodies, and there will be people who will still be vulnerable. So this raises the question over the coming months here, as we selectively open things a tiny little bit, or however it happens, or regionally, or in different areas, will there be two classes of people? Here's something to think about. The people who have been exposed and survived, and the vulnerable. And those two different classes of people will have different ways that they can go about their lives. I mean, that's happened already with identification of people in Germany and in China. Will Americans allow themselves to be identified with a QR code on their phone that I am antibody positive, I can go to work? You know, this is something that's happening in other countries, and steps on those God give, you know, is that tyrannical, at least in the views of some Americans?
Allison, I want to hear your answer to that.
I think on the surface, it sounds like a good idea, but I think it's actually a very dangerous idea in a couple ways. I mean, you're almost essentially, and this is not universally true, but you're actually rewarding the people that weren't careful and went out and got it in a way. And all of us who have been social distancing, now our lives are very different because we were careful, which is
Allison,
not
if only you would have been exposed by now, you could go to.
I mean, maybe I don't know. I think also I was reading something again. There's a lot of unknowns involved, but one of the unknowns is, does having antigens actually make you immune? Because if you have a very mild case or a non-symptomatic case, an asymptomatic case, are you immune to it? We don't know the answer to those questions. And I think
No, we don't
that
know.
can also,
And there are other nastier questions too, and that is that if you're vaccinated, if you've got enough of these guys already in your cells that are, making lots more viruses, and they're nestled within your cells, and enough of them, then the T cells can't kill them either. So it's a vaccine, although in principle, of course, works exceptionally well when it's developed, and we presume it will be. And this is not in defense of any anti-vaccine lunatics, of course, but a vaccine doesn't necessarily protect everyone 100% for those who are already infected well or have immunocompromised systems. And Jeff, I know you're dying to tell us what a cytokine storm is. Perhaps that's in another episode.
That's another.
Okay.
I have gotten. I do things. I have this strange habit of when something comes along like this in whatever field, instead of reading the popular media, I have the habit of going and actually digging into the scientific literature and seeing where it goes. I will say that that the COVID virus is truly fascinating in the way that it works. I mean, it just is. The way that it convinces your immune system to kill you is just fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, boy, God, where to sink my teeth into this? Okay, let's start with the good news. And I think the good news, at least that I have been reading, that they're looking at it and the mutation rates don't seem to be that high.
Oh, quick interjection.
Yeah.
And often, again, this is not, great news. But often mutations of a coronavirus over time make it less, lessen its fatality.
Yeah.
So mutations could help it over time.
Yeah. And so that makes the slow mutation rate kind of a mixed bag.
Yep.
That it's mutating slowly, which means that you've got a better chance. If you just ask people coming in, they'll say, all right, if you get the disease or a vaccine or whatever, it will probably grant pretty good immunity for at least 6 months or thereabouts, and perhaps much, much longer. The vaccine to stuff that we got vaccinated as a kid, those vaccines are still good today, amazingly enough. But, and so that's the good news. Again, the bad news is that it's not evolving away from the being as virulent as it is. So we just don't know. Now, the thing about, we are going to create 2 classes of citizens, one that can work, so on and so forth. First of all, there are already different classes of citizens. I mean, let's be honest. We're talking about coming out of this, maybe 5% of the population maybe will have actually had the virus. And so we're talking about 5% that can do things that the others can't.
Mm-hmm.
Look at wealth distribution. And look at what people who are in the top 5% of the nation in terms of wealth can do as compared with everybody else. And tell me, at least this time you're placed into your slot by the luck of the draw instead of by doing a very good job of choosing your parents. The other thing, though, I mean, I'm going to ask this, Allison, you were talking about that. The next time you get your haircut, okay, would you prefer to get your haircut by someone who has established immunity, or someone that, they've not had the disease, you don't know whether they've got it or not? Who would you prefer to get your haircut by?
Depends on whether, honestly, I would say it doesn't matter, but maybe it depends on whether I've had it or not.
No, you have not had it.
that I know of.
Yeah, that you know of. Okay. You've not had it that you know of.
I'm going to the grocery store tomorrow.
Yeah. Would you prefer to have your hair cut by somebody who you are certain is neither a danger to you nor are you a danger to them? Or would you rather just kind of throw the dice?
Personally, I would want the less dangerous option.
Okay.
But
suppose that you're in, let's take it a step further. Suppose that you are in a care facility, an aged care facility of some sort, which are getting absolutely massacred by the virus right now. Would you prefer that the people who are taking care of you be people that you can be certain that they don't have the disease, or would you prefer they just be anybody off the street?
No, of course you want them to not have the disease. I mean,
okay.
Yes.
So the reality is, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reality is,
idea, it's just it needs to be implemented carefully.
It needs to be implemented carefully. And
you
so
can't just,
you can't say, all right, if you have the disease, that means you can work and feed yourself, and if you haven't, you can't. That would be insane. On the other hand, you might say, okay, if given that we could tap some modest fraction of large piles of accumulated wealth and make sure that nobody in the United States has to go hungry or has to do without a roof over their head or any of that kind of stuff, given that we have the resources to ride this thing out as long as we ride it out without forcing everybody back into the marketplace or into the workplace, then some people who have had it are able to do some jobs. Some people who haven't had it can work from home. Maybe people who don't have those kinds of jobs are going to get a check, but maybe in response to that check, the expectation is that they will be doing online training to improve their productivity when they come out of the other side or something. I mean, the fact is that coming out of this, people who have had the disease are going to be a resource.
So what's good that someone's going to go and intentionally infect themselves so that they can go back to their job because they couldn't work from home?
Okay. If we are going to stick with an economic organization that says that you have to be able to go in and work if you want to be able to feed your family and have a roof over your head, then I see that temptation. If we're going to have an economic organization that says, no, if you have the misfortune of getting this, then there are jobs that you can do that others can't. But if you do not get this, we're going to make certain that you don't suffer for that. And there will be other things that you can do so that when you emerge from this, you will be in a better position economically. You just have to think about it and do it.
How likely do you think?
Huh?
Likely do you think that is to happen? Is my
well, okay. I figured out the right response to that. I've had this conversation with several people.
I'm sure, yeah.
And the response is, oh no, that's just a bridge too far. That's just unthinkable. How could you do that? Remember that the standard that we are comparing this to is to just let a couple of million people die. And so anytime in this, when you find yourself saying, well, how can we do that? Just remember that the thing that the thing that sets the standard over here are a couple of million deaths or so that we just let happen. And when you realize that's the standard, then gee, we just can't do it, ceases to make an awful lot of sense to me. We can let 2 million people die, but we can't figure out how to support people as we wait for COVID to tail off. It's nuts.
Here's
if
another
that's really
problem.
Where our country is, we're in trouble.
That must be a good place to end too. Just Just so you know, my laptop has
All
about
right.
10
Yeah.
degrees.
Okay.
Here's another practical problem, regardless of what happens with the socio-political economic structure of the country. Well, here's another problem. Okay, typically vaccine production. We produce typically in the United States of America 5 to 10 million doses a year for babies and for the elderly. What if all of a sudden we need 330 million doses or a double dose, which is very likely, 660 million doses? We have no way realistically to produce that much vaccine from a production logistical standpoint, unless you would say maybe, I mean, this is discussed in various articles, you could maybe take over, you know, distilleries and breweries and use them for this purpose. But we, right now, this is factors larger, the production of this vaccine, than anything that US companies are prepared for.
You know, there are things for which free market capitalism works spectacularly well. And there are things for which free market capitalism falls absolutely flat on its face. And it turns out that dealing with a global pandemic is one of those places where free market capitalism just falls absolutely flat on its face. And so any kind of a responsible path forward from here is going to require that we move away from some of the free market Calvinistic true believerism that we are so known for. And you know, I'm not saying people, oh, that's socialist. Well, no, it's not socialist, because the fact is that you're making that, if you're the average worker, you are being paid half as much for your productivity now as you were 40 years ago. We're not talking about socialism. We're talking about back wages. Come on, give me a break.
And I'm not talking about the political will or a governmental dictum versus, you know, free will of companies doing something. I'm talking about the physical structure, factories that would be needed to produce this volume.
All right. Back it up. Suppose that we were to need.
They don't exist right now, is what I'm saying.
So
in this country, yeah.
Suppose that we need to produce 600 million doses of this stuff. Okay. And let's suppose that one dose of this stuff is, I don't know, $10. All right. What's 600 million times 10?
It's a big number.
What's 600 million times 10? Give me the number. What's 600 million times 10?
Tack on another zero.
Tack on another zero. So what's the number? $6 billion.
Yep.
If you take the three richest families in the United States and add up their personal wealth, what number do you suppose you come up with?
A very large number.
$190 billion. Okay.
Well, I'm not talking about who's.
So there are
about, you can't physically produce that much of it right
how
now.
How long is it going to be before we are going to have a vaccine to physically produce? 12
to 18 months, if you believe the most expert people who estimate it.
You don't think that in 12 to 18 months we could build that we could redirect enough capacity to be able to produce something like $6 billion worth of vaccine?
Sure we could, but if the government wanted to, you know, and started now, you know, this is not a trivial thing, is all I'm saying.
It is not a technical question, though. It is a political will question.
Okay. Fair enough.
That we are going to find out a lot about who we are as a people, because it's going to be, well, we have millions of lives, and if you start including not just those who die, but those who have their lives destroyed by the lung damage that we're talking about, you know, we're talking about millions of lives on the one hand, And we're talking about pocket change for 14 people on the other hand.
Or for a government for that matter.
Well, but again, the money has to come from some, yeah, for a government. Thing is, if the government, if the folk who ought to be coughing up the money that the government uses to do this are, for example, the 14 people who among them have whatever number I said, what is it, 190 billion or whatever in their pockets. It is pocket change to do what it is that we're talking about doing. We just have to find the political will to do it. And going forward, you know, we're seeing these protests of people pounding on door, oh, that's my right to work and so on and so forth, because Trump told them to.
Didn't they just miss The Walking Dead and they wanted to recreate episodes?
I think that must be it.
Okay.
I think that must be it. I want to know what's going to happen if they're protesting. What's going to happen now when millions of workers are told that they need to all go back out there and you know, die for the economy, when they realize that actually they're not dying for the economy, they're not dying for themselves, they're not dying for their family, they're dying for the folks who are sitting around on the vast majority of wealth, who actually have the wherewithal to tide us over and to not have to do that. You want to see riots in the streets, tell people that they have to go die so that the Waltons can continue to put billions in their pocket. I would hope that would be enough to get people a little bit perturbed.
Well, we will see. We're in the midst of a real-time evolutionary experiment.
We are. Are we going to call it there? We need to.
I've got 1% left. So.
Well, we didn't solve everything, but we explored some interesting topics, and we'll do it again. I think in a few days, probably. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Last time when I said let's do it on Monday, we're doing it on Monday, but you shot me down. So I will say that we are not going to decide right now to do it on Thursday. But if I were a betting person,
we'll see.
Anyway,
all right. Good. Thanks, you guys.
Take care, everybody.
Have fun.
Stay
safe.
Absolutely.